The press is described as the fourth estate of the realm, but the practice of journalism in Nigeria leaves much to be desired. Independence of the media remains a major challenge. For journalists in Abia, poor remuneration and poor working conditions are major constraints.
When you don't pay somebody well, automatically that person will use his ID card, that's meal ticket, in the sense that the so-called the investigative journalist that somebody should have been and maybe standing on your ground, you wouldn't see them doing it, because when you see a little money, you compromise, because it is when you are well comfortable, maybe you see your 3 square meters a day, that you'll be able to sit down, write report, even do investigation.
It's quite unfortunate that the people who speak most about the ill treatment given to others don't get to experience, better working conditions for themselves. So often you hear journalists complain of unpaid salaries or allowances. Media house owners and directors, people who run these organizations should do better. They should make the work that journalists do seamless.
Poor remuneration, censorship by the government, the owners, even media men themselves. Now, why would a journalist work? For instance, it happens, let's not pretend about it, for 3 months or 2 months, and he gets paid 1 month. Don't you think, or don't you see that you have given the opportunity for the man to compromise his conscience?
They, however, call for an end to undue government interference in the activities of the media.
Journalists find it difficult to even probe the government, to even be the watchdog they are supposed to be. Because once you raise a topic, you see a politician, somebody will call you and say, drop this, don't do this, and all that.
As much as we are running a democratic system of government, the journalists still have to function or operate under very not palatable condition, because he or she is being monitored by the government at all levels. They want to know what you're doing, they want to know what you're saying, whether it is in their favor or not, and that is not a good thing. So if we actually want to claim that Nigerian government is living up to the tenets of freedom of information, they really need to give the press a space.
The government very often runs into issues with the press. We've had issues even under this democratic situation where media men have been clamped down into detention and arrested without. And I'm sorry to say, a lot of the media in Nigeria has been bought.
It is expected that media owners, government at all levels, come together to find a lasting solution to the challenges confronting the media in Nigeria. Nora Okafor, Arise News.
Thank you, Nora. Let's now speak to Professor Adeniyi, Dean of Faculty Communications, Bayes University in Abuja, and a Rise News analyst on the government's promise of a free press in the race of the recent arrest and detention of some journalists in the country. Very warm welcome to Newsnight, Prof.
Thank you, Christian.
How free, let me start, how free will you describe the Nigerian press? Are we free indeed?
Well, much as we can say freedom, the question of freedom can be put within context, there are still reasons for us to say that the press is not free in Nigeria. And the freedom we're talking about now is no longer the physical unfreedom that we witnessed in the military era, but now it has, yes, we have shades of physical unfreedom, sometimes arrest, being clamped down in jail and all of that. We see it happening now and again, even in the democratic dispensation. But the greater level of unfreedom that we are witnessing now is the inability of the journalists to freely practice. We have levels of economic unfreedom, cultural unfreedoms, and of course, sometimes, financial unfreedom. All these are impediments, that clock the ability of the journalist to practice freely. And when the journalist, is not able to be effective, if it's not productive, it has a way of telling on, it tells on the quality of ideas, you know, that you find in a social system, realizing that the cross-fertilizations of ideas, you know, can be very important, you know, in the stimulation of progress, you know, because in a democratic setup, in a democratic setting like ours, you need ideas to contest, you know, towards realizing, you know, coming to a logical conclusion, and it's upon conclusions that you can see action, which will propel the system to the next level. So it is important that we keep highlighting this, you know, and massively the UN has set out this day, you know, May 3rd, you know, as Press Freedom Day. It's always very good for us to keep highlighting this, that it's very important for the press to be free, because they have the critical roles to play beyond the talk around the press being the fourth estate of the realm.
All right.
There are different ways in which they put they call leaders to account, they put their feet to fire, remind them of their obligations, and of course act as the intermediary between the civil populace, the civil society,
and
the population and the government.
Absolutely. But when you talk about, you know, the kind of restrictions the Nigerian journalists go through in the discharge of his duties, do you think the role of the media, which, I mean, sine qua non to hold government accountable for its, you know, actions, raise the bar on probity, would you say that the Nigerian journalists are keeping faith with the ethos of their constitutionality?
Yeah, there's no, I think, to be fair, they're not doing badly, you know, because without the press in our current system, we'll have seen a situation where the ruling class will practically be riding roughshod on the citizenry. Most of the time, you know, it's only the press that comes out, you know, to make some noise, in parentheses, if you want, to remind them of their obligation and let them know that, you know, this or that is wrong. And most of the time as well, you see the government being wary, being mindful of, you know, their responsibilities on account of the attention that the press has called to imperfections, you know. So the press is still alive, despite weaknesses, you know. But again, maybe we should be careful when we're talking about the press in the circumstance. Those days when we talk about the press, we talk about the traditional legacy media, or the one you want to call the mainstream media. But now we now have the press that is engendered or rather enhanced by technology. You're talking about the social digital media, you know, and of course you're talking about the increased liberalization of the press, freedom, increased freedom, you know, where every citizen, you know, has a smartphone through which they can add their voice, you know, to, you know, add their voice to debate, to discussions, you know. But of course that also means that there are some levels of responsibility that are not being adhered to, you know, because every freedom comes with responsibility. But that is missing in the circumstance. That's an aspect that we need to address going forward, as well on the part of the government, if at all, you know, they want to be mindful of the kind of information, you know, that they probably get, you know, from the populace, you know, through the instrumentality of the press, you know. This is very, very important, because we are not going to go, the press that is enhanced by technology is not going to go away, you know. Technology is upon us, you know, where in the world of artificial intelligence, you know, Internet of Things is going to get more complicated. And there's an extent to which they can actually deal with these, you know. But what do we do in the circumstance is just to ask that we accept it as it is, you know, rise above, you know, the temptation to be provoked, you know, and rather, you know, provide information that the press ordinarily desire, credible information, so as to prevent speculation, you know.
I was just coming,
yes, as the case could be.
I was just coming to that. That has the modern day technology, I mean, the AI, you know, the acceleration of digital media and the rest helped? Has it really helped in shaping public opinions, putting governments on its toes, particularly in the last few days? We've seen the high-handedness of the Nigeria police and even the military in arresting journalists performing their duties, putting them in gulags, you know, for weeks or days now.
Yeah, I think definitely it has helped in terms of the pace of dissemination of information and in terms of quality sometimes, especially where the practitioner understands the technology and knows how to use it. So in terms of what about sharing, distribution, circulation, those have actually been enhanced. And quality too, if you know how to use AI properly, knowing that you simply have to use it as a framework, to guide you in the proper presentation of your reports, as the case could be, if you understand it properly. Maybe again, it's something that we'll have to discuss later, how to use this technology to improve your job. So, but in terms of pace, in terms of, network of distribution, nodes in the network, has been expanded on account of this technology. But whether or not it is the reason why we're having clampdown is a different ball game. I think what we need to do in the circumstance is to call on the authority, to be much more tolerant. And how do you become tolerant? Know that the average journalist is also a fellow citizen, and there are laws that you can activate if you think that you have been offended. Yeah, and we have said it several times that laws of slander, laws of libel are not just related to offline media. They are also applicable to online media. So it's okay to follow the due process. And most of the time, when it's a question of libel, most of the time it's not necessarily criminal libel. Most of the time it's civil. So why don't you just follow the appropriate system in a civil manner, just like we have had some precedents in the past, Yaradua notably. We have had how they did it in the past, So it's about patience and tolerance and understanding. But what we need to do, what authorities need to do really, is not to shy away from information. If journalists have information that they do require, it's going to distract them or discourage them, from resorting to speculation. Or maybe, just hazarding guesses in a way that authorities might find it offensive. At the end of the day, look at what happened with the EFCC recently. Just a few days ago, there was this report that came from somewhere. And of course, you do not expect anything less in an age of misinformation and disinformation. That some number of governors have been listed as being corrupt in the last since the dawn of democracy.
The advent of democracy.
Yeah, but you see, it was salacious. It was sensational. But EFCC came and denied it. And after the denial, you will not see anything again.
They said they didn't issue it, but that was the work of investigative journalism by a national newspaper to have compiled all the charges against some of these governors and the rest filed in the courts in Nigeria here. What is speculative about that?
No. The point I'm making is that the EFCC came and did what was responsible, what I consider a responsible act of government, of an agency, by just coming in and countermanding the report in a very civil way. To say, no, we didn't issue this. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a better move rather than thinking that instead of just arresting and clamping down. After all, we're talking about exchange of ideas. There will be need for clarifications once in a while in cases of misunderstanding.
Very well said. But let's look at the issue of poor remuneration. You saw that report from Bureau in Abia State in Aba. The issue of poor remuneration is rampant in the society, particularly in the media, as well saying. But how dangerous can this, affect neutrality of the media and the journalist integrity? I ask this question, on the heels of the subnationals, for example. Have they been helping in promoting press freedom?
Well, remuneration is a very big issue, Christian. We exist in a troubled economy. It's not just peculiar to the journalists or to the media practitioners. All other sectors are also necessarily affected, But in the case of journalism, it's an intellectual job, no matter how you want to look at it. Something that has to do with intellectual property, largely, with brain work, the faculty, which means that it has to enjoy a level of stability, a level of predictability, assurance, economic security for you to function fine. And of course, when that is affected, temptation will become high for you to compromise, so for you to take story away from objectivity, for you to slant story in a way, that will favor the one that is paying the piper. This is a problem, you know. Yes, we know these things are there, but how do we deal with it? One, we can deal with it, we can talk about it at two different levels. One, at the macro level, you know, where we'll be talking about the economy, and of course, at the micro level, where you probably be talking to media entrepreneurs for them to be much more responsive or responsible. But do not forget, they also exist within a troubled political economy. So you cannot think that, you know, you cannot isolate that question, as the case could be. Then finally, you also be talking to the journalists to be much more professional. And how can you be very professional? You know, by just keeping to the tenets of the profession. You know, knowing that it's unfair, it's unprofessional, it's unjustifiable, you know, for you to malign people, defame people unnecessarily, because you need to see how hurtful it can be, you know, when somebody feels really offended, you know, or when the story has been written against somebody that is completely false. It can be very, very painful, and practically every public official often experience this. You know? But the thing is to talk to the conscience of the mischievous journalists, you know, to be objective as much as possible.
I was going to ask you.
Away from the bigger issue of the economy and the responsibility of the
I was just going to ask you the last question that borders on the practice of journalism in the 80s in Nigeria, which was dubbed guerrilla journalism. Yeah. You were in practice then, you were a field reporter then with one of Nigeria's famous national newspapers.
The Guardian, yeah.
And when you talk about guerrilla journalism and today's developmental journalism as enunciated by the United Nations, what do you think?
Well, I think guerrilla journalism, so to say, was a child of circumstance. The military hunted journalists, you know, and of course, they wouldn't let journalists be. Many journalists that practiced in those times had a reason or the other to visit the Yellow House as the present headquarters of, you know, Yellow House.
The DSS.
DSS headquarters, you know. It was really a troublesome, harrowing experience that people don't easily want to remember. And of course, people had to go into hiding, you know, practicing in dungeons.
A lot of journalists were killed there,
even,
you know.
The Bagada Kato is still missing up to today. Nobody knows what became of him. So it was a child of circumstances, and it was very effective for the period. But now we're no longer in that area. We're in an era of relative peace that democracy envisages. You know. So, but then what do we do thereafter, if not to be talking about the kind of journalism practice that will propel development, that will foster understanding, you know, build consensus, and move the nation to the next level through information dissemination, education, and to a very large extent, entertainment. But do not forget also the question of awareness creation. Awareness is key, you know. Our citizens, you know, our population is still largely ignorant, and the onus is often on the journalists, you know, whether directly or indirectly, to educate the citizens, you know, properly in the interest of understanding and development. No society can grow without proper understanding of the population. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks so very much. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, Dean Faculty.
No, Dean School of Postgraduate Studies.
Dean School of Postgraduate Studies, you know. The journalism profession is so sweet.
Much,
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.